Good morning, everybody. And to start, all of you in this room get bonus points for making it in and through those big snowflakes out there, so thank you for joining us. My name is Jack Rotherham. I am the publisher of The Hill, and welcome to this morning's event, The Hill's Newsmaker series, Leadership in Action. I would like to start by thanking our sponsors, American University School of Public Affairs and the Kennedy Political Union. We greatly appreciate your continued partnership. After a midterm election that saw a record number of women being elected to Congress and minorities making history, the balance of power in Washington has indeed shifted. With Democrats winning control of the House and Republicans retaining the leadership of the Senate, bipartisanship will now have to become more than just a buzzword. But will the new Congress prioritize collaboration and compromise over partisanship and rhetoric? Let's find out. We are pleased to be joined today by several incoming members of the 116th Congress and are looking forward to learning about their approach to leadership and governing. We will also hear from veteran members about what bipartisanship could look like in a divided Congress. But first, a few quick housekeeping notes. In addition to our audience here at the top of the Hill, we're also live streaming on thehill.com. Please keep your phones on silent throughout the program, but we do encourage you to engage in the discussion on social media. In fact, you can follow us on Twitter at The Hill Events and comment using the hashtag #TheHillNewsmaker. We are going to be taking questions from the audience during the program, so please think about those while we're talking, and please be on the lookout for members of our team with handheld mics. Finally, there is a short feedback survey on your chairs, and we would greatly appreciate it if you fill that out. We're always looking to hear your thoughts and, frankly, make our events as best they can be. So, let's dive right in. We begin this morning with a panel of newly elected members of the Democratic House majority. Congresswoman-elect Veronica Escobar will represent Texas's 23rd District and is one of the first two Latinas to represent Texas in Congress. Congressman-elect Joe Neguse will represent Colorado's 2nd District and is the first African-American elected to Congress from that state. And Congresswoman-elect Donna Shalala, former Secretary of Health and Human Services under President Clinton, and she will represent Florida's 27th District. Joining them on stage is my colleague and friend, The Hill's editor-in-chief, Bob Cusack. Bob, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks for joining us on this beautiful fall day. I want to, first of all, congratulations to all of you on being elected to Congress. The news of the day, one of the big news stories of the day is leadership elections. And I just want to start by going down the line. There's a lot of questions now about whether Democrats should support Nancy Pelosi to be Speaker. Congresswoman-elect Escobar, do you support Nancy Pelosi to be Speaker?
I do. And just a quick correction, I'm from the 16th Congressional District, not the 23rd.
Okay. Congressman-elect Neguse?
I haven't made a decision yet.
Okay.
I will support Nancy.
Why?
She's been a terrific leader. She got us the majority.
Mm-hmm.
And she has exceptional leadership skills to keep what is the big tent Democratic Party together in a disciplined way. And I think she shares the values and the ideas of the vast majority of Democrats in this country. The vilification of Nancy has taken place because the Republicans decided to take her on.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe the Democratic Party and the newly elected, as well as the people who are already in power in the Democratic Party, will have none of that. We know where the negatives came from. And finally, I'd make a point about new ideas, because the idea that we should identify someone from another generation with new ideas, I have yet to hear one of those new ideas.
Mm-hmm.
That has not been part of the Democratic Party platform and ideas for more than a generation.
RepElect Escobar, you've made history with your election, one of the first two Latinas to be elected from the the state of Texas. Why did it take so long?
It's very difficult for women to run, I'll tell you, just in general. Especially for Congress. I've been very fortunate. I've served in local government for over a decade before running for Congress. And when I ran for Congress, it definitely was a very different race. It's much more expensive. You have to be willing to essentially run 2 races. It's like you're running in DC almost, trying to gain support, and you're running at home. And Texas is far from Washington. And if you have children, it is really difficult and challenging to leave your children to do it. I mean, even if you're in a very, I think, fair partnership and marriage, child rearing generally falls primarily on the shoulders of the woman. I mean, that's just the way that it is. So it's harder for women, but for women of color, it's even more challenging. My race, I had to raise $1 million in El Paso, Texas, a safe blue seat for the primary. That was unheard of. And so if you don't have access, if you're not able to write yourself a big check, it's tough. If you don't have access to wealthy friends and family, it's tough. You know, you have to have access to a lot of money. So I can understand why it took so long, but hopefully the doors that we've all opened for others, because there's a lot of history makers, we can help other diverse candidates so that Congress continues to look more and more like America.
RepElect Neguse, you are the first African American from the state of Colorado. Why did you run for Congress?
I ran for Congress because I was deeply concerned about the direction that our country was taking under this administration. My parents are immigrants. They came here as refugees from East Africa, a small country called Eritrea, over 35 years ago. And so, you know, from my perspective, seeing the way in which this administration was treating immigrants and folks who might have accents like my parents do, compelled me to decide that I should throw my hat in the ring and be a part of trying to change the guard and turn the page from, I think, some pretty draconian policies that this administration has pursued for the better part of the last 2 years.
But President Trump was a big part of that reason?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. RepElect Shalala, I used to cover you as a healthcare writer at HHS. You were at HHS the entire Clinton administration, 8 years.
I survived.
Why? And why are you coming back to this town? Why did you want to?
You know, I tell the story. I woke up in February, I turned on the television, and I just got pissed off.
Exactly.
And it was really out of anger and concern that this administration was destroying the healthcare system in this country. It's pre-existing conditions. Shoot, if you don't have coverage on pre-existing conditions, you don't have health insurance. Either you have coverage or you don't have coverage. So it wasn't just that, it was the environment, it was everything that was going on, as well as the behavior of the commander-in-chief. So I just got angry. I looked at the field. Ileana Ros-Lehtinen had held the seat for 30 years. It was considered a toss-up, but it wasn't really a toss-up because the Republicans had dominated. We didn't even have the infrastructure in the Democratic Party to run a race. We had run candidates before. She had beaten them handily. She was stepping down. It was an open seat. And I thought that I was really the best person to take the seat for the Democrats. But I had to go through a primary to get there.
Mm-hmm. RepElect Neguse, well, divided government, well, that's what's going to happen next year. Republicans obviously, in this Congress, they control the House and the Senate and the White House and pass a tax cut law with no Democratic support. What do you think? Do you think that there can be something done? Can the parties work together? Can Democrats in the House work with this president? And if so, what on?
Well, so first I would say I think it's a little rich and ironic for some of the Republicans yesterday to be calling for bipartisanship just after 2 years of a government in which they ran roughshod over the Democratic minority party with a tax bill and so forth, not working, not trying to listen to Democrats at all. All that being said, I think that the Democratic majority in the House should ultimately work to try to solve problems across the aisle. I actually think there are a number of different policy areas where it makes sense. An infrastructure bill, that a lot of folks have talked about. I think that that's an area where perhaps Republicans and Democrats might be able to kind of come together. There was a big opioid bill that was just passed and signed by the president. I think there's more to do in that regard, certainly a crisis that's ravaging a lot of parts of the country, including in my state of Colorado. And so, again, another area where we should, I hope, can kind of come together and have conversations and make some bipartisan progress. That's certainly how we've done it in Colorado, in our state, where we are no stranger to divided government, and so I'm hopeful we can do that here in Washington.
RepElect Escobar, same question to you. What are the issues that you think there can be some agreement on?
No, I agree with Joe. I mean, we should have all been demanding bipartisanship for a very, very long time. But those of us, I think, who are fresh off the campaign trail probably heard most clearly that Americans are really tired of the division. It's really worn down the country in a way that we have to respond. And I think bipartisanship is possible with exactly the areas that Joe mentioned, an infrastructure bill, criminal justice reform, I think, is an opportunity. We have to tackle comprehensive immigration reform, and I think if the business community weighs in along with human rights organizations, I think there probably would be more areas of unity than division. It would be up to the Republicans, though, to kind of step a little bit closer to where we need to be. But in local government, where I come from, and Joe saw this at home as well, you have to work together to get things done because you're so close to the people. You know, I'd be at the grocery store and folks would want to know why I voted a certain way. And just the further away you get from home, it's harder for folks to keep you accountable. So we're going to have to keep each other accountable. We're going to have to work together. We're going to have to focus on areas of unity. But I think also we should absolutely not sacrifice certain values. You know, there's been an erosion of voting rights. There's been an effort to erode civil rights. Those are values that people fought and died for. We can't compromise on all things.
RepElect Shalala, two-part question to you. Where is bipartisanship? What is, same question that I posed to the other two. Also, Democrats won really the House on a message of health care. You know health care inside and out. What needs to be done in health care? Is single payer the answer?
Well, let me say this, that I agree with my colleagues about bipartisanship, but the Republicans have to go halfway, and they haven't demonstrated that. I spent a career here in Washington doing bipartisan bills, including the Children's Health Insurance Plan. You'll remember it was Orrin Hatch and Ted Kennedy that finally came together to get that passed. So that I've had a long history of working across the aisle. I would add to the issues sensible gun control, because all of us come from areas in which that is an issue, particularly for young people who turned out in unbelievable numbers, and also the environmental issues. For me, in Miami, it's life or death. Climate change, we don't have any climate change deniers in South Florida. The Republicans that ran for office were not climate change deniers, let me assure you. So whether it's part of the infrastructure bill or whether we do something standalone, that I have to add to the issues that they identified. The fact is, we've got a lot of consensus on the issues. What we don't have consensus on is how you get there. Healthcare, for example. The principle is universal healthcare. That is, finding a way to get everyone covered. One strategy is Medicare for all. Is that the way to go? A single payer system? We've never been able to put together the politics across the board for a single payer system, in large part, I believe, because a majority of Americans have pretty good health care that's probably better than Medicare. So you have to be careful when you're talking about Medicare for all, not to take away from people who have better health insurance. A lot of the people that talk about Medicare for all don't actually know what's in Medicare, but Medicaid is actually a more comprehensive program than Medicare is, because it has long-term care included in it. So taking away people who have very good health insurance that's better than Medicare is probably not a smart strategy, and it's less expensive to let people keep what they have, particularly if it's better than Medicare. So there are ways to get to the principle of universal health care, in my judgment, without lowering the quality of everybody's health care. And that's the only principle I have in terms of being careful about this. I understand the symbolism, but the symbolism for me is universal health care, getting everybody good health insurance that covers pre-existing conditions, that's comprehensive enough so that they don't have to worry about the next accident they have will put them in bankruptcy. So that's the point I kept making during the campaign. I was usually debating against people that didn't actually know what was in the Medicare program and how limited it was. It doesn't cover dental benefits, for example. So I think we can work it out. Democrats are for everybody having good health insurance that's affordable. My constituents are concerned about the out-of-pocket costs and about the coverage issue. The pre-existing condition issue really hit them. But the out-of-pocket costs, we're going to take on the drug costs in this country, the pharmaceutical costs. The out-of-pocket costs are critical as well, because we have lots of people who for the first time are getting coverage. 95,000 people in my district get Obamacare. This administration has done everything it could to undermine Obamacare. We have the highest enrollments in Florida. We have 1.5 million people that are in Obamacare. We can't mess around with those issues. But I'll go back to the principle. The principle is to get everybody covered.
RepElect Escobar, really the story of this election, a lot of it is looking at Texas and the changing dynamic of Texas. And one of the dynamics this year was Beto O'Rourke, who fell a couple points short of defeating Ted Cruz. Really think that he needed to get the endorsement of President Trump, or he might have lost that race. But a lot of people are crediting O'Rourke with taking out some House Republicans because a lot more people were showing up at the polls. Do you believe that, and do you think he should run for president?
So Beto is a dear friend, and
you're replacing him.
And
yes.
I knew him long before he and I ran for office.
Before he was a star.
And we'll be friends long after. He is an extraordinary candidate, and he is an incredible public servant, and he is exactly the type of candidate that I think could fire up the country should he run for president. And I hope that he runs for president. And you know, as his friend, I will be nagging him as much as I possibly can in the hopes that he will do it. You know, there was a lot happening in Texas, and I do credit Beto for a lot of the energy. He is the hardest working candidate that I have ever seen in my lifetime. I mean, he worked incredibly hard, going to all 254 counties, going to every town hall, taking photos with everybody who stood in line and would wait for an hour to take a photo with him. Just incredible. He wanted to hear everybody. He wanted to talk to everybody because he wanted people to feel like they have a place in this process and in this country. So he was really extraordinary in that way, in that he didn't ignore any corner of Texas. But I also do think that we need to give tremendous credit to candidates like Colin Allred, candidates like Gina Ortiz-Jones, candidates like Lizzie Fletcher, who ran in Texas and who worked really hard in their districts to turn out the vote. I worked really hard in my district, even though after winning my primary, El Paso hasn't had a Republican in Congress in decades, but my goal was to double turnout from one midterm over another. So we had a very aggressive field strategy in Congressional District 16, and it even went into Congressional District 23, which was our neighbor. We targeted low propensity Democratic voters. So we spent an enormous amount of resources and time knocking on the doors of people who have felt left out of the system, and at their doorstep telling them that we needed their vote, telling them that they needed to be a part of the process. And it took a lot of work and energy, but it paid off. Our voter turnout in El Paso, in terms of percentage increase, led the state of Texas. We also worked with other border counties. We did something really fun, and we did it for Beto. We chartered a bus and got about 35 of our most hardcore volunteers, and we called it the Border Bus Tour for Beto. And we drove to Laredo, McAllen, Brownsville. We did joint rallies. We did joint block walking to really get border voters to realize that this election we had a tremendous amount at stake. Border communities like mine have had a target on their backs by this administration. Immigrant communities, border communities, Latino communities. And so there was a lot happening in Texas that definitely was led by Beto, but I'll tell you there were also some voters that personally, whose doors I knocked on, who didn't even know who was on the ballot, but for them, Trump was on the ballot. So he also played a tremendous role in my state with Latino communities and border communities. Joe and I had a conversation the other night, along with a couple of other newly elected representatives. Our goal and our job is going to be to keep those voters fired up and to make sure that in a state like Texas, where Beto came so close, 2.5 points, 200,000 people in a pool of 8 million voters, it was so close. The folks who came out the first time, especially the young people, we have to give them something to hang on to so that they don't feel dispirited, so that they don't feel hopeless, so that they don't walk away thinking, ugh, I tried my best and we still didn't win. We won, we won. We flipped lots of seats, the border turned down in record numbers, and the state is purple because of people like Beto O'Rourke. We've just got to keep working and keep that energy up.
We have a couple minutes, so I'm going to open up for perhaps one or at most 2 questions from the audience. If you have a question, raise your hand and we will have a mic, and if you can just wait for the mic and just identify yourself.
Thank you. My name is Christina Tsafoulias. I'm with the Swiss Embassy here in Washington, D.C. There's a bit of a saying that no one gets elected on foreign policy issues. I'm curious for all 3 of you, in an age when there are strategic issues to be thinking about vis-a-vis China, when there's follow-on from Russian election meddling and Russian influence campaigns around the world, are there foreign policy issues that resonate with you and with your constituents?
My answer is yes. Miami is the capital of Latin America. And therefore, issues of Latin America are extremely important, including what's happening in Nicaragua and in Venezuela, as well as what's happening with immigration. And Cuba is always an issue in Miami. So in terms of Latin America, there's no question about it. I tried during the campaign to talk a little about global health and the United States' responsibilities. And I certainly talked about the Paris Accord because all of us are concerned about this administration's posture towards global warming and the environment. But in terms of the Russian elections, NATO, which are issues that we're all concerned about, that did not come up during the campaign. But certainly the focus on Latin America, what was happening in Latin America, the humanitarian aid, and the investments that we need to make in Central America in particular, in law enforcement and other kinds of investments, always came up during my campaign. No one laughed when I said Miami was the center.
Surely.
The capital of Latin America.
We have run out of time. Please thank our soon-to-be lawmakers for joining us this morning. I'll hand it back to Jack.